on their website for you to read and take a look at what they're really asking you to do before you choose to adopt that software. If you go to most of the free software sites, you can click down a couple levels and find the GPL. You can find the X license, the Apache license, whichever terms and conditions you have to accept in order to use that software. Now, when a proprietary software company buries their license so you can't even read it until after you have paid for the product, then they really have something to be ashamed of. They'll make sweeping generalizations about copyright law in general. They love to sling around the term intellectual property. But if you really read what they're asking you to agree to, they're asking you to turn off part of your brain. They're asking you to turn off part of your ability to work with other people and to do business when you use their software. So it's an interesting theoretical decision. It's an interesting theoretical argument to make, but if you really want to understand it, pull up a proprietary software license and read the terms of what they're actually asking you to do. And most people would see those terms as unreasonable.
Most people also say that there's no way you can make money with regards to open source. How do you react to that?
Well, there's no way to make money with the English language. I come up with new words, phrases, analogies, all kinds of fun stuff in the English language, and people paraphrase what I had to say and make money talking about some of the same things that I did. If I tried to lock down what I talk about and what I write about the same way as a proprietary software company does, then the whole industry of speaking, writing, media would be overly litigious, and transaction costs would be prohibitive. The reason why software is a great thing is that it allows individuals and small organizations to manage enormous complexity. As soon as you lay the same legal structures onto every aspect of that enormous complexity that you put onto other highly complex systems, such as the nationwide electrical grid or a jet airliner, then you lose the advantages of software. You're throwing away what makes software productive.
Let's talk about what's currently happening with regards to open source. It's the marketing sites, now more users which have never used open source are now getting involved in it. And Linux itself has become more user-friendly. You have GUI interfaces like KDE, for instance, that are now readily available, and they look very similar to proprietary OSs. How do you now adapt your magazine for users entering the Linux market?
There are two kinds of new users to the Linux market. One kind of new Linux user is somebody who's just a tire kicker, somebody who's trying it out. I want to see what it does. I want to see if I can make Linux do all the same things as my old proprietary OS. And so that's one type of new user. They come to the Linux user group meetings, but they're not that terribly motivated. The other kind of new user is somebody who has a project in mind, who says, I really want to do this, whether it's an online community site, a company intranet server, a replacement for an old system that's grown unmaintainable or whose vendor has cut it off. I really want to do this. I really want to make this work. And I'm evaluating Linux as the best tool to make that happen. When you get somebody motivated like that, who has a goal in mind, then you give them the tools, you give them a little help where they get stuck, and you've got another Linux expert on the streets within a few months. Somebody who's just a tire kicker, who just wants to get Linux to do the exact same thing that they were already happy with on a proprietary OS, well, they're probably not going to be motivated enough to make the switch.
But why not? Perhaps they might want to make the switch because it's more cost effective.
If they're really motivated to save money, then they'll make it work. When when you try to bring Linux to new users and make it completely seamless for them and get the new user not to make any effort at all, there's always some point at which the person is going to have to make some effort. If someone comes to Linux with the point of view of make this exactly as easy to use and work exactly the same way as my existing proprietary OS, or I'm out of here, then that person is not worth spending as much time on as on somebody who says, I want to make this project work for me, and here's my question.
So you're saying that there's no real option for Linux to get into the mass market because most users aren't willing to necessarily contribute but merely use the software?
It's not whether or not they're willing to contribute to the software. It's how much are they willing to make a real change instead of trying to make Linux be something that it's not. Even on the proprietary software side, if somebody wants to switch from Microsoft Windows to Apple Mac OS or vice versa, there are some sticky points in switching. So if someone isn't motivated to get things to work the way they want them to work, then that person's really hard to help with getting started on Linux.
What about someone who's watching this right now and says, hey, I want to try Linux, and they hop onto the internet and they try to find information, but they find that the majority of the information that they tend to find off the net is quite technical. How is there information available to the layman user out there?
That's where some of the Linux distributions, the companies that are packaging Linux on a CD that's ready to install, are being very helpful and very useful. There's a company called Linspire, formerly Lindows, that's doing Linux pre-installed PCs as well as box sets of Linux. There's a company called SUSE that will also sell you a complete box set that includes an excellent set of manuals. If you go out and buy the SUSE distribution, you may not even have to buy a Linux book because that comes with good books in the box. So if you want to get started from Linux, starting from nothing, from no Linux experience at all, you're best off buying a good book or buying a good box set distribution or both.
Don, one of the things that a lot of people really don't realize when it comes to where Linux is sitting in the present, it's come a really long way. Can you just take us through some of the highlights over the last a decade or so of Linux?
Well, when Linux originally started, you had to be kind of a kernel hacker to use it. You had to be able to actually modify parts of the kernel code in order to get the thing to boot. That got improved pretty quick, but when the first Linux distributions were available, there still wasn't a lot of software that would work on it. So you had to have some C programming expertise to get your favorite C programs to run on Linux. Then, as the distributions got bigger, there's more software prepackaged on the distribution when you got it. Linux became something that was highly useful for people who were doing system administration or security stuff, web development, running a mail server, running a name server. And only recently has a lot of more end-user-oriented software, such as OpenOffice and Mozilla, gotten released for stable and mature to the point where Linux is a good desktop OS for non-technical users. So there's the whole crossing the chasm idea, and Linux kind of hops chasm after chasm and gets into being useful for greater and greater numbers of users as it goes along.
Now, we also have heard about a company called